And hello, everybody. My name is Jody Giannakopoulos. So glad you're here with us to meet with Karen Chan for her program, Investing Made Simple. Some months ago, I was on my financial learning quest, and I thought, let's just give it a whirl and go online and see what we find. I consulted with our business librarian, and we came up with a terrific name. So I found Karen Chan, and right away knew I had the right person and the right content for what I was hoping for. I plan to learn this evening, and I hope you are too. I usually follow the adage that if it's good for me, it's probably going to be good for someone else too. So I would like to also mention that tomorrow night is bingo. So after you've done all of this strategizing, you could also just cut loose and play some bingo with me on Zoom. But without further ado, I will allow Karen to do an introduction of herself for you and carry on with our program for the evening. Feel free to put your questions in chat and we will address all of them at the end of the program. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Jody. Thank you. And thank you to everybody who's come to join us this evening. It's such a gorgeous evening. I hope you're somewhere that you can maybe enjoy the breeze coming through, maybe see some flowers out of the corner of your eye. We're just at that gorgeous time of year. So yes, we're talking about Investing Made Simple tonight. And just a word about me, because I am a firm believer that when you go to anything that is purportedly financial education, you should make sure that you know something about the presenter and whether or not there is a hidden agenda. So I am strictly education. And I am well trained in how to do that because for 18 years, I was with University of Illinois Extension. I supposedly retired from there in 2012, but apparently I wasn't ready to be retired, and financial education appears to be what's in my blood. And so I formed my own little LLC back in 2012, strictly for the purpose of doing financial education. I am a certified financial planner, but I got that certification so that I could do more, what's the right word, sophisticated topics than I might have been comfortable dealing with otherwise. So although I hold the designation, I do not practice, meaning I do not take individual clients. I only use it to do a better job as an educator. And I do not now, nor have I ever sold any financial products or services. And so tonight is not a lure to get you to sign up so that I can call and sell you something later. All right. You would know that the library wouldn't do that to you anyway, but just to be very clear. The other thing I want to be clear about tonight is, especially with our topic of tonight about investing, tonight is education. It is not investment advice. And I'll give you an example what I think the difference is. I hope that you will leave tonight saying things like, I learned this, and I need to think about how I'm going to use that information or how that applies to me, rather than you leaving tonight saying, oh, Karen Chan said I should fill in the blank. I'm not giving advice, so I'm really not giving you instructions about how you should invest. I'm trying to give you information that will make you a wiser, more educated investor. You may decide that you do need some advice specific to your situation. And so if you like, at the end, we can talk about how to look for a financial advisor. And just a heads up, at the end, I'll also be talking about my website, where you can find links to resources on a number of topics, one of which is finding financial advice. So that if that's something of interest to you, I would encourage you to visit KarenChanFinancialEd.com, click on the resources tab, and click on Finding Financial Advice that's right for you. And you'll find things that links that will take you to the Securities and Exchange Commission, to the SEC, to organizations that financial planners tend to be members of, along with everything from from interview guides that might help you interview someone if you were looking to choose someone to work with. So these are the kinds of resources that I used in developing another program that I do on choosing financial advice. But on with tonight's topic. To get us started understanding investments, I'm going to use the example of Frida. Frida wants to start a business, and her business is going to be Frida's Fine Furniture. And using this example of her starting a business, believe it or not, you're going to learn most of what you need to understand about investing. What would Frida need to get this business off the ground? Probably several things came to your mind, but probably foremost would be money. And so how would she get the money that she needs to start the business? She has two main options. One is that she could take a partner, meaning that she could sell a portion of her business to this individual who invests in Frida's Fine Furniture. And so Frida took a partner who put in $100,000, and in return, Frida gave them 25% ownership. And you'll notice my icon of a shark there. Probably many of you have at least watched a part of a program from the shark series on television. And so that's why I chose the shark as our icon to represent ownership of a part of a business. But the other way that Frida could get the money that she needs to get the business off the ground is to borrow it. And I'm going to suggest that in Frida's situation, what she ends up doing is a loan from a single individual who also put in $100,000. They agreed that Frida will pay them 6% interest for 10 years. And at the end of the 10 years, the interest, at the end of those interest-only payments, at the end of 10 years, she will get her principal back. So that's how the loan is going to be structured. So let's skip forward 10 years. Frida was in the right place at the right time. You know, she started this business during the pandemic when people were really, spending so much time at home, investing in their homes, buying new furniture, and her business just took off. She got well established, and here 10 years later, the business is worth $2 million. And at this point, Frida's partner decides that although it's been a great ride and he's enjoyed, being involved with the company, he's ready to sell out and go do something else. And so he's sorry, we've got some mics open. Thank you. And so he sells his 25% of the business, and 25% of $2 million is a cool $500,000. That means that Frida's partner walked away with a $400,000 profit. Pretty cool. Then, coincidentally, it's the end of 10 years, and so she's also going to settle up with her lender. Now, over the course of the 10 years, the lender has received $60,000 in interest payments. $6,000 a year, 10 years, $60,000 in interest. And at this point, Frida writes the lender a check for $100,000, the lender's investment, and said, "Thank you very much for doing business." Well, this begs the question of, why does the partner deserve to get this $400,000 of profit when the lender got what appears to be measly in comparison, $60,000 of interest? And if we were face to face, you'd probably have some ideas about why this difference. And it boils down to a little thing called risk. Because if things go badly, let's say that Frida actually wasn't in the right place at the right time. She started her business as people were headed back to work, back to their offices. They were not investing in their homes that much at this point, perhaps. Or maybe she had a bad business plan, made other errors. At any rate, the business closes. And at that point in time, after she settles the lease on the building that she had, she sells off her samples and so forth. And what's left is $50,000. That's what the business has after she takes care of everything. So the lender steps up and says, "Hey, I loaned you $100,000. And Frida says, "Well, here's 50. because that's all there is. And so in this case, the lender loses half of his investment, getting just $50,000 instead of the $100,000 that he had loaned. Well, then the partner steps up and says, well, what about me? Well, in the situation that we just described, actually, the net worth of the business was negative. It couldn't even pay the lender back. And so when the partner says, what about me? Frida says, well, you own 25%, and 25% of nothing is nothing. And so in this case, the partner lost his entire investment. This is why people who own part of a business tend to get rewarded significantly more than the people who simply loan the business money, because that partner, that co-owner, is taking on significantly more risk than the lender. Now, the lender faces risks as well, but it's the risks faced by the business owners that we're more familiar with. We're familiar with the concept that businesses go out of business, right? That if you were a typewriter manufacturer back in 1970, within 20 years, you were having trouble keeping your business open. We're also familiar with market risk, which means nothing to do with how the business is being run, but what the overall economy is doing. You know, we're very accustomed to, on the noon news or on the 6 o'clock news, we're accustomed to hearing, you know, the Dow Jones went up or down by this much, the Standard & Poor's went up or down by this much, and is telling us as a whole, our stock market has moved in one direction or the other. And generally, as the market moves, individual businesses' values will move as well. We typically understand those two kinds of risks. But look at the list of risks that lenders face. The first is credit risk. Now, let me tell you about credit risk that affects you when you're going out to borrow money yourself. Let's say you're going to buy a car or you apply for a credit card. What those lenders do is evaluate credit risk. What is their risk of lending you money and not getting paid back? And so in a business situation here, with the lender who gave Frida $100,000 for her business, they faced credit risk that Frida would not be able to make the payments or be able to pay back the full amount that she owed. A lender also faces interest rate risk. So when interest rates go up or down, if you've got an IOU from somebody where they're supposed to pay you a certain interest rate, the value of that IOU is dependent on how do the current interest rates compare with the interest rate that that loan is getting. So the loan that we set up for Frida was 6%. Let's say that interest rates went up. After that, this loan was set up, interest rates went up to 8%. That means that the lender, if they wanted to sell this IOU to somebody else, the person who is buying it would not be it would be hard to get somebody interested in buying it because this loan is only paying them 6%. They could loan money to somebody else and get 8% because that's the going rate right now, which means that our lender would not be able to sell their IOU on to somebody else for the full $100,000. Maybe they could only get $80,000 for it because of interest rate risk. Lenders also face reinvestment rate risk. Our loan here was set up to be a 10-year loan. At the end of the 10 years, the lender was supposed to get their $100,000 back. They've been getting 6% all this time. Well, what interest rate are they going to be able to get going forward at the end of that 10 years? Depends on what current interest rates are. That's reinvestment rate risk. If interest rates have gone down, they may not be able to get 6% anymore. They might be getting 4%. On the other hand, if interest rates have gone up, again, they'll be able to reinvest their money at the higher rate. But it's so one of your takeaways at this point should be risk doesn't necessarily mean you're going to lose money. Risk says what you're going to get is uncertain. There's a lot of variability. And then the final risk that lenders face, and you face this if you have money in a savings account, if you have money in a CD, if you have a savings bond, you face purchasing power risk. And this lender who gave Frida's business the $100,000 faced purchasing power risk as well. Let's say that at the beginning, when the lender gave Frida that $100,000, let's say that in a particular neighborhood, let's say that that $100,000 could have bought a 3-bedroom, 1.5-bath home in decent condition. 10 years pass. Frida writes a check and gives the lender the $100,000 back. At this point, maybe that $100,000 is only 2/3 or even half of what is needed to buy that same house. That is purchasing power risk. The risk that over time, inflation has eaten away at the value of the money that you're going to be getting back, your principal that you had saved or put into that interest-bearing account or loaned. So, like I say, we're more familiar with the risks that the sharks, the investors, the business shareholders face. Less familiar with the risks that the lender faces. But here's the thing: if you understand what we just did, you understand a good bit about stocks and about bonds, because stocks are ownership in a business. You own a share or a certain number of shares of stock in a business, which means that the value of that stock depends on market risk, what the overall market is doing, and business risk specific to that business or that category of businesses. And all of these risks are the risks that bondholders face. Okay. Bonds are nonetheless considered to be less risky than stocks because it is very rare to lose most or all of what you've invested. With stocks, it is possible. As in the example with Frida's company, it is possible to lose most or all of your money. So what you need to remember is that shareholders, stock owners, are owners of those businesses. And that means that they will benefit from the profit that a company has. They will be hurt by any losses the company has. But the way that owners are often rewarded when a company has profit, the company has a couple of choices what they can do with their profits each year. Some companies, like Microsoft, in the first couple of decades that it existed, Microsoft was hugely profitable, but it never paid a dividend. Instead, they reinvested those profits into the company, building better products, hiring better IT people. And then one day they said, we really don't need to reinvest all this profit anymore. Instead, now we're going to start sharing it out with our shareholders, our stock owners, in the form of a dividend. And so when you own part of a business, there are two ways that you can benefit. You can make a profit when you sell your shares at an increase in value, but you may have also been getting dividend payments along the way. And so those are the two ways that shareholders can be making money on the stocks that they own. Now, bondholders are lenders. I think you got that already. A bond is an IOU. And so that's why interest payments are the main way that lenders make money on their loans, is through the interest payments. And at the end of the loan, then the principal is supposed to be returned to them. Now, who issues bonds? A number of entities sell bonds in order to raise cash. So in our example of Frida was, although we didn't use the word, Frida had issued a bond to this lender in order to raise cash to start her business, right? Corporations do that all the time. You can buy bonds from many different well-known companies here in the United States. Government entities here also issue bonds. The federal government issues bonds. State and local municipal governments issue bonds. Probably when your library was built, odds are that it was built using money that was generated when your library district sold bonds to raise money. It was a way of raising money without increasing taxes. And then over time, out of tax revenue, your library district was able to pay off that bond or bonds. So what happens when a company starts and eventually tends to grow? We have labels that we use for companies based on size. And so let's say that we go back to our example where Frida did really well. Let's say that she did so well that she's opened up branches, she's opened up stores all across the country. She is the name in terms of fine furniture, and she decides that she wants to sell shares in her company. She wants to sell stock. So she incorporates, first of all, and then she does what's known as an initial public offering, which means it's the first time that anybody has the opportunity to buy shares in her company. This is how stocks begin to trade on the stock markets that we hear reported on the news. Now, initially, some companies start out as microcaps because they're simply small companies, small enough that they don't have a lot of shares of stock, a lot of investors. But then they may continue to grow, like Frida's company was, becomes what we would call a small cap company. Cap here is short for capitalization or capital, meaning the value of the company. An example of a small cap company might be something like Chipotle, or what's that? What's that restaurant that you see alongside all the interstate highways? Cracker Barrel. Now, there's a lot of them, but the value of those companies is nowhere near, for example, Walmart, General Motors, General Electric, Abbott Labs, Microsoft, um, Amazon, Google. Now we're talking about the large caps, okay? Very large, valuable companies. And of course, in between, we have something that's referred to as mid cap. Now, why is this important? It's kind of become more important over the years, because what we have figured out is that the size of the company, to a certain extent, tells us how that company is going to behave in certain economic circumstances. For instance, small cap companies tend to grow faster in a good economy than well-established companies, but they may also be hurt harder when the economy tanks. Mid cap, kind of in the middle, and then large cap tend to not grow as fast. Now, these are not, as you understand, these are not hard and fast rules. These are tendencies that have been observed over time. And so someone came up with the idea that it would help us to capture what's happening with these different groups of companies if we label them, thus small cap, mid cap, large cap, and hey, let's create a way to track the performance of each of these. These are called indexes. The most widely recognized index is the Dow Jones Industrial Average that gets reported on all the news all the time, but it actually only represents 35 companies, and it's no longer really considered a good barometer of the economy. So now we tend to talk about large cap stocks, and the main index tracking those is the Standard & Poor's 500, which you also hear reported on the news a lot. Similarly, there are indexes that have been created to track the mid-cap stocks. MSCI mid-cap is one of those indexes. For small cap, you may or may not have heard of the Russell 2000. But these are tools that people created in order to track and compare the comparison of different groups of stocks and different individual companies with those as well. But the thing is, you don't have to buy individual stocks and bonds in order to invest. And you don't even have to have a lot of money to invest, because just like people came up with the idea of indexes, somebody else came up with the idea of this thing called a mutual fund. A mutual fund is run by an investment company where they pool money from lots of different investors. Each investor owns a portion of this mutual fund, kind of the same way that you would own shares in a stock, only in this case, you're owning shares of a fund that inside of it owns a lot of different stocks or a lot of different bonds or some of both. One of the advantages of mutual funds is that they are liquid. You can buy shares from the fund, typically at any time, and you can sell your shares back to the fund, typically at any time. And they give you immediate diversification. You know, if you were starting to invest back in the 1950s, the only way you could be diversified was to buy shares of stock in a bunch of different companies and to buy bonds from a bunch of different companies. And that was very hard to do unless you had a lot of money. So you can see where mutual funds really sort of leveled the playing field so that even folks without a lot of money could get started investing and reap those benefits. Now, within the whole universe of mutual funds, I like to divide them up not only by what they own, but by what we're going to call investment style. And the two main groups, in my opinion, as far as investment style are index funds, which are actually passive investments, and actively managed funds. What's the difference? Let's start with talking about the actively managed funds. With actively managed funds, there is a fund manager or a team of managers who are constantly evaluating the companies that are out there and actively deciding on a day-to-day basis which companies they're going to buy more of, which companies they're going to sell, which companies they're going to just hold. So you have managers trying to make informed decisions based on the data available to them about which companies are going to do best and which companies are not going to do well. Index investing, though, kind of turns that on its head because somewhere along the line, a fellow by the name of John Bogle, who started Vanguard, which started index funds, there was research that showed that these active fund managers, as a whole, really don't do any better than the average mutual fund. And so John Bogle came up with the idea that, well, if the best you're going to get is average anyway, then why not just be average? And so he came up with the idea of creating mutual funds that track those exact indexes that we talked about, like the Standard & Poor's 500. And so instead of, one way of looking at this is index funds, instead of trying to beat the market, they try to be the market because they're going to invest in pretty much all of the companies that would be in their category, like large cap or small cap. Now, let's take a moment here and kind of familiarize ourselves when we're talking about mutual funds. I mean, that's a concrete thing, but it may not be something that you're accustomed to talking about. So let me give you some examples. Here are some of the companies, some of the largest companies, and some that are particularly well known, of the companies that run mutual funds. So you may have heard of American Funds. You may have heard of Vanguard. I just mentioned them. Fidelity, T. Rowe Price, Dodge & Cox, Oakmark. These are investment companies who run mutual funds. And so on the second list here, I've listed just an example of one fund from each of these. For example, Bond Fund of America is obviously a bond fund run by American Funds. The Vanguard Index 500 Fund is a mutual fund run by Vanguard, and you notice it's got the word index in it, so we already know that this is an index fund. Fidelity, an example would be the Fidelity US Bond Index. T. Rowe Price runs T. Rowe Price International Stock. Dodge & Cox has Dodge & Cox Stock, and Oakmark has its trademark fund called Oakmark. So these may be names that you recognize, having heard along the way. All right, what are we going to do with this information? The point at which most of us are faced with making an investment choice is when we take a job and the job offers us some sort of a retirement plan. If you're in the public sector, you work for a company, particularly if it's a big going interest, they are likely going to offer you to enroll in a 401k. If you work in government or nonprofit, you might be offered a 403b or even a 457. And what does research tell us about how people approach signing up for these retirement plans and choosing their investments? You're going to be given a list of investments to choose from. And the research says that you'll probably pick 3 or 4 funds, regardless of how many are offered. You may have not had any rhyme or reason to how you chose them, but you figured you shouldn't put all your money in one, so that's what you did. Probably you divide your money equally among them. Now, if it is a company that you're working for that is publicly traded, they may give you the option of investing in the company's stock too. And maybe out of loyalty, maybe out of familiarity, many people will decide to put a substantial portion of their money into the company stock. And then time passes. And over time, any mistakes that you made when you first signed up get compounded because most of us don't reevaluate and make any changes. So let's follow an example. Let's look at Julie, who is going to work at Frida's Fine Furniture. It has a 401k plan. And Julie's choices about how to invest fall into two categories. One is stock in Frida's Fine Furniture, or there's this long list of mutual funds. And, it can be a little intimidating to see a long list of stuff. So Julie wisely focuses on not all the individual names of the funds, but the headings because they are grouped. And here's what she sees. She sees a list that one of the headings is large cap funds, one is mid cap funds, one is small cap funds. And so at this point you're going, okay, we talked about those. I get that. I know what those are. Large cap funds invest in big companies. Small cap funds invest in small companies, and mid cap funds invest in companies that are kind of in the middle. All right. Then she sees headings for international and another one for global. Now Julie's a little confused. Don't those mean the same thing? In investing, they do not. International means that mutual fund is going to invest strictly in companies that are located in countries outside of the United States. A global mutual fund invests in the whole world, including the United States. A subtle but important difference, just so that you know what you're investing in. Then she sees a heading called emerging markets. That means investing in countries that are not well developed, whose stock markets are not well developed, and that typically are viewed as having higher risk. For example, investing in Thailand would be a little bit more risky probably than investing in Japan. Not that Thailand isn't a wonderful country. I lived there for a year and a half and I love it dearly. But investing there for somebody in the United States would be viewed as being a little more risky. It's an emerging market compared to Japan, United States, Great Britain, so forth. And then finally, there's this category called specialty select. In my opinion, you can ignore it. We talked about the fact that one of the advantages of mutual funds is that they give you diversification. Okay, you're going to have money invested in a lot of different companies and in a lot of different fields. But specialty and select funds say things like, oh, this one invests strictly in the automotive industry. This one invests specifically in the pharmaceuticals industry, and so forth. And it really goes away from one of the advantages that mutual funds offer, which is that diversification. Okay, that was the big hard list. Now, she also sees, looking over here on the right in my yellow box, she sees a list of different kinds of bond funds, corporate funds.
Definitely.
Yes. We have a mic open again. Thank you. We have government bond funds. We have municipal bond funds, meaning that they are bonds issued by small government entities like park districts, library districts, townships, villages, counties, and one called high yield. Well, that got Julie's attention. High yield sounds good, especially since right now interest rates are rock bottom low. And she's like, yeah, I'd like to get more interest on my money if I put money in a bond fund. Well, spoiler alert, high yield is just another way of saying high risk. You could also call these bond funds junk bonds, meaning that financially, the companies aren't in the best of shape, and there's some risks that they will not be able to pay you back. So there's a reason why the interest rates are higher. It's because they have to pay higher interest rates to get people to lend them money. And then finally, a money market account. Okay, Julie's feeling kind of overwhelmed. You probably are too, because you've heard me go through all these. So Julie's eyes light on this group here in the middle. You notice how this is a green box intentionally, because if you mix blue and yellow, what do you get? You get green. These are hybrid types of mutual funds. They own both stocks and bonds and typically some cash. They may be called target date funds or life cycle funds or asset allocation funds or balanced funds, but all of those titles tell you that these funds hold a combination of stocks and bonds and probably cash. I'm going to talk more about the target date funds in particular because they are always offered in retirement plans like 401ks and 403bs, and you may be interested in them. So Julie has 2 or 3 different ways that she could go about choosing her investment options here. One would be that she does what I'm going to call the old-fashioned route, where she's going to choose individual funds. So maybe she's going to choose a large cap fund. She's going to choose a small cap fund. She's going to choose a bond fund. Maybe she's going to choose an international stock fund. But as she is looking at these, she's going to, if she's really going to do a good job, she needs to look and understand some things about the funds. Who are the managers? What are their track records? Did these funds just change managers recently? And if that's the case, then can she depend that the fund is going to do as well as it did under the former manager? Stuff like that. She also has to wonder, she's going to have to keep track because some funds that start out as small or mid-cap funds, they just keep hanging on to their companies that they're doing so well. And eventually those companies become big companies. And now your small cap mutual fund isn't a small cap fund anymore. It's a large cap fund. Maybe that means that you need to reallocate some because you choose how much money to put into those categories based on things like your age, your horizon, when you're going to need the money, your risk tolerance, that sort of thing. All right. She's also going to have to choose between those actively managed funds versus the passive ones that are called index funds. She may want to look at the cost of owning the funds, and the cost of owning a mutual fund is generally represented by the expense ratio. It tells you what percent of your investment each year is going to be taken for operation expenses. There could be other fees, typically not in 401ks and 403bs, but if you are investing on your own outside of a retirement plan, there could be commissions, there could be other fees associated with investing. And like I said, and then she's got to worry about the performance of the individual funds, who the manager is, and so forth, as well as thinking about how her situation could change over time. She's going to have to decide for herself, how much should she have in stocks? How much should she have in bonds? That's called asset allocation. And once again, she starts to feel a little overwhelmed, even though she can eliminate, some of the kinds of investments that she sees. But she's just feeling like, really, I've got to figure out what are my criteria for choosing my funds. I'm going to have to monitor them. I need to look and see how much they cost. Oh my gosh. And somebody says, hey, Julie, you know what? You could make it a lot easier. She's like, I'm all for easy. What do you mean? She says, well, remember you learned about those index funds? You could just choose index funds. Then you don't worry about who the manager is and whether the manager changes. And you don't even worry about whether the fund changes its category, whether it becomes a large cap fund when you thought it was a small cap fund. She says you can buy index funds that cover the major asset classes, and it only takes 4. So she could put her money in one bond index fund that would probably cover all the types of bonds in the US economy. And as far as stocks, she could choose a large cap fund and a fund that maybe is a blend of mid and small cap and an international fund. And you know what? She has covered all of the major asset classes that an investor wants to be exposed to. Ironically, you know where you can find a great example of this? If you work for the federal government and you have access to the Thrift Savings Plan, this is what the Thrift Savings Plan offers you. They offer you index funds covering the major categories, and your only other real choice is a money market fund or a target date retirement fund, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But these offer, I'm sorry, let me go back to that previous slide. Some of the advantages of index funds are they are much less costly to own than actively managed funds. Actively managed funds generally cost somewhere around 1% per year to own. But you can find index funds that cost as little as 1/10 of 1% to own. They give broad diversification because they are tracking these broad indexes. And like I said, you don't have to worry about style drift. That's the formal name for how a company might start out as being small company and end up being big company. Or it might start out as, if it was a balanced fund, let's say, that owns stocks and bonds, maybe it started out as being mostly a stock fund, but later on it ended up being mostly a bond fund. That is style drift. And with index funds, you don't have to be concerned about that. And so here's an example of how that would work. You see those same 4 asset classes listed on the left here. There are indexes that track all of them. And in this case, we're going to call those indexes the benchmarks, because that's what these funds are going to try to match. Okay, so these are the benchmarks. And here are examples of the mutual funds that you could see that are trying to track these benchmarks. So for US bonds, you might see, let's say that your employer offers Vanguard mutual funds as the source for most of your investments. You might see the Vanguard Total Bond Market Index Fund. Or if it's iShares that your company is using, iShares Core Total US Bond, and so on and so forth. And so with this, Julie could choose four mutual funds, and her responsibilities become a lot less. But she does still have some responsibilities. She will have to figure out how much of her money should be in large company stocks, how much should be in small company stocks. If, like over the past 5 years or so, the stock market has just gone crazy upward, even if she had started out with the right asset allocation at the beginning of that 5 years, let's say she started out with 60% of her money in stocks and 40% in bonds. After the way the stock market has performed this last 5 years, she could easily at this point be 80 or 85% in stocks and only 15 or 20% in bonds, which means she's actually got a lot more risk now than she intended. She would need to rebalance, selling some of the stocks and moving that money either to bonds or to cash. That's called rebalancing. And that would be on her to do that. And as Julie ages, she will need to reevaluate her asset allocation from time to time, because the general thinking is as you approach and enter retirement, you should become more conservative. And that means having more of your money in bonds and cash, which generally means money market accounts and so forth, as opposed to in stocks. So this is simpler, but not totally simple. And I told you, Julie's all about simple. And remember, the name of tonight's program was Investing Made Simple. Well, here it is. Julie could actually choose just one fund and be done with it. It would be one fund that invests in other funds. So you would be choosing one fund, but it inside of it would actually own some shares in stock mutual funds and bond mutual funds, and maybe a mutual fund that is money market. These funds are going to adjust their asset allocation over time so that as the investor gets older and needs to be more conservative, the fund will be becoming more conservative. And these kinds of funds are actually today usually the default in your retirement plans. If you don't choose an investment, this is likely what your money would be put into. And you're going to see them typically listed as either target date retirement funds or life cycle funds or something similar. And you'll be able to spot them because there will be a series of them. You might see target date 2025 fund, target date 2030 fund, target date 2035 fund, and so on up to like maybe target date 2070 fund. What is that telling you? Each of those funds is intended to hold an allocation of stocks, bonds, and cash appropriate for someone who would be retiring at approximately the year that's named in the name of the fund. So if I were someone who was planning to retire in about 5 years, I'd probably put my money in the 2025 fund. My niece, on the other hand, who is only in her late 20s, she could be as long as 40 years from retirement. She would be putting her money in like the 2055 or the 2060 fund. And it's really pretty much set and forget it, because these funds have already diversified, not just across different companies, but across different asset classes for you. When one investment does really well, better than another, and you get out of balance, the fund is going to rebalance for you to maintain the proportion of stocks, bonds, and cash that it intends to hold for someone you're years away from retirement. And the asset allocation is based on your age. And as you age, they adjust their allocation, and that's known as the glide path. You'll often see it as a little graph where they show you the proportion in stocks, and it'll start out really high, let's say when the retirement year is like 20 or 30 or even 40 years away. And then as you start to approach retirement, the proportion of stocks will start to drop off. And then around the time you reach retirement, it'll reach a point of stasis again, and it'll maintain the same ratio from there on out. Don't worry about what happens when that year comes. Let's say that you put money in the 2025 fund because you're going to be retiring in the next 4, 5, 6 years. When 2025 comes, you don't have to do anything. But at that point, the fund will be relabeled as something like retirement income fund, because it's just going to maintain that appropriate asset allocation for someone in retirement. And all it will do is rebalance from time to time to maintain that allocation. Now, within retirement plans like 401ks and 403bs, you may have some services that are offered to you, questionnaire type things that will help you assess your risk tolerance, that would help you if you wanted to go with options 1 or 2. What if you have investments outside of this retirement plan? They may have a tool that will let you analyze your total portfolio by importing information about other investments that you hold. And particularly with retirement plans, even if you do choose multiple mutual funds, maybe you feel like that puts you in a little bit better control, or you just understand that better. Within retirement accounts, you may be able to set it up so they will automatically rebalance for you. Let's say that you said you want to be 70% stocks and 30% bonds, and within that 70%, it'll be broken out for large cap, small cap, international. When your custodian of your retirement plan sees that you've gotten away from that 70-30, maybe you've gotten up to 78 20, what would that be, 78 22, they will automatically rebalance for you periodically. You won't need to do it. And you may also have some services where you can get individual consultations to help you understand what's going on. So there are ways to get help, typically from the custodian of your retirement plan at work. Now, of course, you can invest on your own outside of retirement plans, but one of the reasons we like retirement plans is because of the tax breaks that they give us, which are also available by investing in an IRA, which you would set up on your own. The difference between going through your company retirement account and your IRA, as far as investment choices, would be that with your IRA, you will have to choose the custodian. In other words, the financial institution where you want to have the account. Could be a bank, could be a broker, could be a mutual fund company. You'll need to ask and inquire and compare fees, or what is the minimum amount that I need to get started. You'll need to decide whether you want it to be a no-load mutual fund company, perhaps, which means that there is no salesperson, so there are no commissions paid to a salesperson. But that also means that more of the responsibility is on you for choosing your investments. You would need to evaluate your investment options the same as you did with your 401k. And this last bullet here about Roth, I want to talk about that for just a moment before we go to the next slide. In IRAs, but also in your retirement plans, you will have a choice between what's known as traditional or tax-deferred accounts or Roth accounts. The difference is how your investments are treated for tax purposes. So with the traditional tax deferred retirement plans, it means that when you choose to have some of your income taken and put into that retirement account, that part of your income is not taxed in that year. It will eventually be taxed when you take the money out, and the growth in the account will be taxed when it's taken out as well. So traditional tax deferred retirement accounts give you a tax advantage in the year you put the money in, called contributing. With a Roth account, though, the tax advantage comes down the road when you take the money out. When you contribute to a Roth account, there is no tax break that year. You will still pay tax on that part of your income that you contributed to the Roth plan. But down the road, when you take the money out, if you follow the rules, which are pretty easy, basically it's 5 years and waiting until you're 59 and a half, you will pay no tax on the growth in the account. You already pay tax on the original contribution, so there's no tax on that ever when you take the money out, but you'll be totally avoiding tax on the growth in the account. Now, sometimes for younger investors and those who are more financially at risk, like their jobs are not very certain, that sort of thing, a Roth IRA is unique, even compared to a Roth 401k or Roth 403b. A Roth IRA provides the opportunity to take out your contributions at any time, no tax, no penalty, and to be able to take out only your contributions. The growth in the account will stay there until you've removed all your contributions. And so for a lot of younger folks who are worried about locking their money up for 20, 30, 40 years and really not knowing what their financial future looks like, they can view their Roth IRA really as sort of a backup emergency fund. You should have an emergency fund aside from this, but a Roth IRA can actually function as a backup retirement plan. A backup emergency fund. And the other thing that's nice about Roth for many younger workers is in our younger working years, we are typically making a much lower amount than we will be when we're in the prime of our careers, later on in our 40s and 50s and maybe 60s. And so in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, it's likely that you will be in a higher tax bracket. So in the early years of your career, when you're just getting started, maybe even starting out in a nonprofit setting, your tax bracket may be so low that contributing to a tax deferred account really doesn't help you that much. You already owe little or any tax. Why would hiding that money from income at this point help you? It doesn't. What could help you more is down the road when you're making more, when you're in a higher tax bracket, to be able to take money out without paying tax on the growth at that time could be a bigger benefit. And so low income years are typically a good time to think about Roth retirement plans rather than tax deferred. And in this case, I would say Roth either in your employer plan or an IRA. So let's compare IRAs and 401ks here for a minute. And actually the 401k and 403b are pretty much the same. So I've lumped those together here. So contribution limits for IRAs generally right now $6,000 a year. It does go up with inflation. And if you're over 50, they let you put in an extra $1,000. Compare that with how much you could put into your 401k or 403b. $19,500 is the limit for those per year. If an individual is over 50 years old, and that they could put in an additional 6,500. So if your goal is to invest quite a bit, 401k or 403b is going to give you a much higher limit than your IRA. Plus, many 401ks and some 403bs offer an employer match. Something like this. They may say that if you contribute anything up to 3% of your income, that they will match maybe 100% or 50%, meaning that for every dollar you put in, they're going to give you another 50 cents as a contribution to your retirement plan. You may have to work there a certain number of years before you gain ownership. It's called being vested in that employer match. But an employer match can be very valuable. And that's one of the reasons why if you do have an employer match, you would probably choose to put money into your employer plan instead of your IRA to start with. Contribution deadlines for the employer plan, end of the year. For IRAs, generally you can put money in until the due date for taxes, which we have just passed, and so you can no longer put money into an IRA for 2020. At this point, you would be contributing for 2021. Eligibility with IRAs, there are income limits if you want to be able to deduct your contributions if you're also covered by an employer plan, and there are income limits for contributing to Roth. There are no income limits on the employer plans. For withdrawals, like I said, for the Roth IRA, there is the potential advantage of being able to pull your contributions out without having to tap into the growth, because the growth is what would cause potentially taxes and penalties if it hasn't been in there at least 5 years, and if you're not at least 59 and a half. Both types of accounts have required minimum distributions starting at age 72 and for each year thereafter. The only retirement plan that does not have required minimum distributions is the Roth IRA. So that's just a little overview of how those compare. And a quick comment about something that you may or may not encounter. Typically, the investments that you see inside employee retirement plans are mutual funds. However, you could see annuities. This is more common in 403B plans than it is in 401ks. What is an annuity? It's an investment with an insurance wrapper put around it. That insurance wrapper gives you certain assurances about perhaps either the value of the account or something like that. But annuities, because of that insurance wrapper, typically cost quite a bit more. Remember that expense ratio I talked about for mutual funds? The cost of owning an annuity could be twice as much, or even two or three or four times as much as owning simple mutual funds, especially if you're looking at index mutual funds. So that can actually hurt you during your accumulation years. But as you approach retirement, if you are offered annuities in your retirement plan, at that point, some of the guarantees about that if you should lose money, if the value of your investment should drop, that you would have some protection against that. That could be useful as you approach retirement when you'll be starting to draw on this. You might also be offered the opportunity to use an annuity that will give you a guaranteed monthly check for the rest of your life. And in this way, your 401k or 403b could actually be turned into something that behaves very much like a pension, because pensions, those golden things that some employers still offer, allow you to earn a monthly check for the rest of your life. So you can take your 401k or 403b and use that to convert into an annuity to achieve something similar. But this is just a quick overview about annuities. Let me also say that before you ever put money into an annuity, make sure that you have gotten advice from someone other than the salesperson to point out any risks or costs or disadvantages that come along with that, because annuities come in many flavors. Some are appropriate tools for someone wanting to get a guaranteed payment in retirement. Others do not do that job very well. Make sure that you're well informed before putting money into an annuity. All right, we've covered quite a bit of territory tonight. Just want to remind you that this was education and not investment advice. If you do want to identify a financial professional to work with, as I said, I do have some links to good resources on my website. So if you go to KarenChanFinancialEd.com, click on resources, and then click on finding financial advice that's right for you, you'll find links to, like I said, all of these are reputable. You can call this my curated list of sources of information to help you understand the types of financial professionals we have, how they're regulated, what their responsibility is to you as their client, and so forth. And with that, I'm going to ask Jody to let us know. What have we got in chat? Do we have some questions to answer, Jody?
Yes, and I was like, okay, they're coming now. Okay, so first one out is, how critical is it to choose the right year for target date retirement funds?
Semi-critical. Let's say that you're 45 right now. So theoretically, you might be retiring in 20 years, which would be 2040. So that would kind of be the obvious choice. But what if you're kind of scared, you're kind of nervous about this, you don't know how well you would handle seeing a drop in the value of your account? One way to be more conservative but still use target date funds would be to back up to target date 2030 or 2035, because those are assuming the person's a little older, a little closer to retirement. They would be a little more conservative. Okay, so they are intended as a guideline. And generally, you would probably want to choose a target date fund that is pretty close to the time you think you would retire, but it's not a requirement. They all operate the same way. It would be the allocation and the glide path, that would be different. Good question.
Yes. Next up, for a 58-year-old, Roth is probably not the way to go, correct?
Well, it depends. If you are 58 and at the peak of your earnings and in the highest tax bracket you've ever been in, you're right. Roth probably not the obvious choice for you. If, on the other hand, you've suffered a dramatic drop in income because of hours being cut or being laid off and having kind of start over again in a new profession where your earnings are less, you're in a low tax bracket, it's really more about the income tax bracket of where you are now relative to where you think you will be down the road when you take the money out.
Thank you, by the way. I have a question about Roth also. Is, you can take out from the fund each year. Is that correct? Or is it at any time? My experience was that there was a date each year where I was reaching maturity, and that was my time to make a move. Is the essence of the Roth that you don't have to wait for that? Because maybe it was a traditional IRA and I just didn't understand.
Okay, I'm going to guess that what you're describing is that what you had put your money into were CDs, and you were looking at CD maturity dates. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, which has nothing to do with Roth or tax deferred. You were restricted by the maturity dates of the CDs so that you weren't breaking open a CD that hadn't matured and paying a penalty. Okay. With Roth, unless you were limited by the type of investment that it was in, with Roth, you would be able to withdraw your contributions at any time. Now, let me clarify. It's only Roth IRAs that you can choose the contributions and pull those out alone. If you're in a Roth 401k or 403b, when you take the money out, it's going to be a mixture of contributions and growth in the account. And so if you were taking it out too early, which means either less than 5 years after the account was opened, or even if you meet the 5-year rule, if you're not yet 59 and a half, you're not dead or disabled, then you would be subject to taxes and perhaps penalties on that growth. And so the Roth 401k, Roth 403b doesn't offer this unique opportunity to take out contributions only. That's the Roth IRA. And you could take your contributions out of a Roth IRA at any time. You could take them all out in 1 year. You could say, I need $3,000 this year and $6,000 next year. That's a total of $9,000. Maybe your total contributions were $10,000. That means you only have $1 more thousand you can take out before you start tapping into the growth, and then you'll be looking at that same taxes and penalties situation. Hope that helps.
Yes, thank you. Anyone else? Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question directly or put it in chat. I'm going to do the last call here. We could talk all night, but this has been terrific. The slides are invaluable. The handout is great. And anybody who has registered and attended the program or attended the program will be receiving that handout from Karen. People are saying thank you. And I, of course, thank you as well. You know, definitely, I am so pleased to hear that you were with University of Illinois Extension for all of those years. I think that's such a terrific organization in so many ways and so underestimated.
Yes. Yes. It's one of those secrets. It's one of those, you know, well-kept secrets that shouldn't be.
Yes. Yes. Mayodi, do you have a question?
Yeah, just quick one. 457, what kind, is it Roth or is it 401k, 403b?
Okay. For 401k, 403b, and 457 are all names for types of retirement plans that are offered by different types of employers. 457s are generally only offered by government entities. Okay, so my guess is we're probably talking about state of Illinois or municipality or what have you. The rules for them are slightly different, but for the person who's the employee putting money into it, they all operate basically the same. Within your 457, for sure you have the tax deferred type. You might have the option to put your money into a Roth, but it would still be under the 457 umbrella.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, just as you know, as a former University of Illinois employee, I had access to the university's 403b plan, but I was also a state employee, so I had access to the 457 plan. So like I said, it's really not, we don't choose which one we have. It's based on what type of employer we work for and which of these they legally are authorized to provide to their employees. Yeah. And by the way, where these crazy names come from is the section and paragraph of the IRS code that authorize these types of retirement accounts. So that's why they have such oddball names.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, I feel like I've been springboarded into definitely checking out your website and looking at all of the options that we have. I do appreciate so much that you make that information available.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I learned a lot. Thank you.
That's great to hear.
I hope everyone did. Everybody, just so you know, the recording will be up on our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search Addison Public Library and it'll be there probably right away, but certainly feel free to contact me if you need a link or anything for that matter. Karen, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Looking forward to having you back.
I look forward to it too.
Thanks.